Quick intro for me. I'm the lead data scientist at Multitudes. I'm the founding team, and I also run a lot of our R&D collaborations. So, thanks to everyone who's here today that was involved in the research as well. I can see there are a couple of participants. Obviously, won't name who they are, but thank you so much for contributing to kind of some of the research that we've been doing. Um, I also want to talk a little bit about the Tech Leader Chats community for those of you who are new. Um, it's a community for human-centric leaders, and we're just trying to support a place for engineering and product leaders to learn and grow from each other. Multitudes sponsors the Tech Leader Chats, and so we kind of host these conversations once a month on average, but it kind of mixes and changes based on how things are going for us at the time. But yeah, we as a company do a lot in terms of helping engineering teams deliver more in a more sustainable way. And right now we're focusing a lot on measuring the impact of AI on developer productivity as well. So yeah, if you're ever curious, reach out to Lauren or I, and we can always jam about that too. Awesome. So the structure for today will be I'm going to speak a little bit about our research and some of the stuff that we found in the research, and then I'll talk about that, and then I'll hand it over to Aino, who's going to speak more about a bunch of anti-patterns in retros as well. And so that's kind of how the session will be structured, and we'll have time for Q&A. So I know I'll do a bigger introduction when I finish my part of the session. Awesome. So with all of that housekeeping in the way, just want to kind of kick off with a little bit of the motivation, just so we're all aligned on what we view as retros. From Agile, retros are a tool for continuous improvement, and they're a practice to really reflect and improve what's kind of been working in the previous period, whether or not that was a sprint or a Kanban doesn't really matter, I guess. But it's an opportunity for the team to come together and have a discussion around ways to improve. Um, One thing which isn't actually what retros were designed for, but what often happens is they can rely too much on what feels true and not what is true. And that's part of the motivation for the research that we wanted to go to. For us, retros are all about continuous improvement, and you should be using data in your retros. And subjective insight alongside objective data allows us to guide and steer conversations and actually provide opportunities to improve, not just kind of be a place for venting. So this kind of motivated us to ask the research question around how do teams gather and actually utilize data, and when they don't, what are the barriers that we can kind of identify as part of blocking people from using retros, data in retros, sorry. So we surveyed about 19 different teams across different industries. We did an online survey where we inquired about team profiles, project sprint length, retro meeting practices, and then how they track and use data and prepare for retros as well. And then we also conducted a range of different interviews for people. And we found some really interesting things. About 80% of the people said that retros are very important or important for how teams work together. 50% of the people said that retros are important for what the team does. But at the same time, many people don't view that retros are kind of working well for them. And so it was interesting to kind of have that tension of everyone views them as really important and sees the need for retros, but there was a lot of kind of like angst around like the way retros are kind of being held in their organizations today. In relation to our research question, we found that teams are 1.5 times more likely to use subjective data, even though they don't not have access to objective data. Most have access to the information, they choose not to use it. And even though people know and acknowledge that it can be helpful for challenging memory biases or assumptions in conversation as well. So what were the key barriers that we found? So these are the three main ones, and I'll link to the paper in the chat in a sec. But the three main barriers that we kind of identified were one, that there's a lack of psychological safety that can prevent people from speaking up. And so, because of that lack of psychological safety, people don't feel comfortable to bring objective data to the conversation. So that was one thing. Another key pillar was transparency. We called it asymmetric data usage and access by different roles in the paper. What we really mean by that is hey, like my VP of Eng and manager has information and access to data that they're then using to bring into a conversation that like an individual contributor won't have. And so that in itself, like as a mechanism in relation to how data on people is being tracked in an organization, can be a blocker for allowing kind of data to come into the retros. And so one of the key recommendations that we had in the research was give access to everyone and make it easy and safe for people to access the information, and that allows people to have a much more transparent conversation about things as well. We're actually like we have built a feature in our app to help that as well, and that's like an ongoing area of research as well, is how do you actually build psychological safety and transparency in the tools that you use as well. And so one thing that we thought is interesting and could foster that is by allowing people to annotate data, for example, and having shared annotations across the platform so that everyone can kind of see, hey, my, deployment frequency crashed this week. And before a VP of engineering says like, why is the deployment frequency on 0? We can annotate the data and say like, oh, the reason this was 0 is because everyone was on leave, or we had a hackathon, or we had a code freeze. And having that transparency means not only can the individual contributors annotate the data themselves, leadership can also kind of communicate downwards without kind of holding this place for conversation. And ideally that can open a barrier for why people might not want to use data as well. And the last one was a preference for simple tracking methods and not very complicated metrics. Because retros are a place where people want to have a conversation, one thing that we found was having really complicated metrics, which you might have for like a metrics meeting or product analytics, for example. It can be quite hard to have conversations around things that not everyone has the same idea on how to define. And so one, just keeping fewer but simple metrics that everyone understands and are aligned on. And then the other one is also having like less process in terms of kind of preparing the data that you might want to for a retro. How do you do that? Well, it's always something that we're thinking a lot about at Multitudes on how we do as a company, but there's lots of different takeaways for what people can do. Is one, just agree on a set of metrics. For example, like we're going to focus on lead time, so let's ship faster, and then just make sure that you're tracking that and then bring that to the next conversation as well. Or we want to see this feature that we're building be in our top 5 for the next kind of quarter. And then so when you're reflecting on the release of that new feature, having the usage statistics to kind of support the conversation, rather than having people come to a meeting and say, oh yeah, like, I don't think it like landed that well, but like someone else is saying, no, I talked to this customer and they loved it. If you've got data to support that conversation, it allows for a much more structured conversation and allows you to actually improve continuously as well. This was a funny quote from the research that I pulled out. I think retros are important. However, I think the team's execution of retros right now is poor, and therefore retros are a current waste of time. So that's kind of where we landed with the research. And like I said, there's a lot more going on with what we're doing with it as well. Spoke to the annotations briefly, but we're doing some other cool stuff too. But it was really exciting. And yeah, we wrote a paper, and I will put it in the chat for people who want to kind of read it on your own later. But that's like a little bit of a, I guess, teaser to some of the stuff that I want to introduce now Aino to speak about. So again, just we got connected to Aino via the Yao community, so I can see there are a few Yao people here as well. Michelle's not here, but if you're watching the recording, thank you for the introduction. And Michelle wrote a book on retros, which is fantastic to our ears and to learn about someone writing and caring so much about something similar to what we do, and also has a lot of experience in research, holds a PhD in computer science, and also teaches people and has a company called MetaDeveloper. And I will hand it over now to you, Aino, to kind of share your thoughts. I'm curious to hear how the research landed for you, but also learn a lot about the retro anti-patterns. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Cool, then I'll start sharing mine. So you almost introduced me perfectly there, Vivek. So I don't know what else to say, but I want to talk about myself a little bit, so I'm gonna do it, right? So my name is Aino Corry. I'm Danish. I live in Denmark. I'm 54 years old. I've got 3 adult children. I've got a PhD in computer science, which was about theoretical language constructs in object-oriented languages. and design patterns. And that's when design patterns was very new. I finished my PhD in 2001. When Java just came out, patterns just came out. It's hard to imagine now, I know. But I started by accident facilitating retrospectives. And I'm going to come back to that in my short presentation. But just I've been doing it for more than 15 years, facilitating retrospectives, first for my own team, then for other teams. I'm now facilitating retrospectives for everybody who doesn't manage to run away first. So I'm facilitating retrospectives for my family every time we've been on a vacation. My daughter is bachelor in computer science. She recently applied for a job, and in the job interview, they asked her, "Do you know what a retrospective is?" And she's, I've been in retrospective since I was 3 years old, so they don't get that much. Um, my aim, yeah. Sorry, should I stop talking so let people say something?
No, I just realized I just said it's hilarious and realized I wasn't on mute. I bad. Sorry, keep going.
Okay. Well, but I want to encourage everybody to ask questions or come up with criticism while I'm talking. If you manage to stop me, my point about this is not falling asleep while I do it because it's really early in the morning, and that's why I've hyped myself up on coffee. So it might be a bit difficult to get a question in, but I think you should try. So my aim is to make a very short presentation about what I believe retrospectives are and why I believe they're important. And I took some notes on the research from Lauren and Vivek, and I'm gonna like sort of add back to that. I want to just show you my book, Retrospectives, Anti-Patterns, Don't Make My Mistakes. Uh, because I did facilitate a lot of retrospectives, and I was in a lot of retrospectives, and I noticed that there was a lot of recurring problems like anti-patterns that I could see. And I'm going to share with you 5 of these anti-patterns today with some concrete advice for how to avoid them or how to get out of them if you can. And yes, I have an octopus because I really love octopuses. I also love mermaids, but octopuses are just a little bit more fun. But why are we here? We're here because retrospectives is the most important thing of agile development. And it can be the most important thing of your family as well. But let's start with software development. So the reason why we do retrospectives is we want to share our experiences. We want to share the data. We want to share how we feel about things. We want to appreciate each other. We want to both appreciate in the positive way, saying it's great that you did that, or that's wonderful that we can do that, but also appreciate this was hard for you, this was difficult, we're spending too much time on this, or something like that. And then the way that I sell it to the managers is that people also learn in a retrospective. They learn and they improve the way that they are working so that the management can see that they save money on this team. But most of all, I think the retrospectives are there because to understand everything is to forgive everything. That's what my late father used to say. And I was so irritated with him when I was a teenager because I just wanted to hate on people who were stupid. But the older I get, the more I can see that he's right, that understanding everything makes it really difficult to continue to be angry and think people are stupid. So to me, that's really important. We asked the 3 questions that Vivek also mentioned. What worked well? What can we do better? What still puzzles us? And the thing about puzzling, I think, is quite important because sometimes when there's been a big project and it hasn't gone as it should, some people are saying, I was wondering, why didn't we do it like this? Or why didn't we do it like that? And this wondering, this puzzling doesn't have a normal place to be in a project or a process. So I think it's quite important in the retrospectives to allow people to talk about what are you wondering about? It's not big enough to be a complaint. It's not big enough to be something that you'll say something out loud, but you have this little like nagging, worrying feeling. You have this little stone in your sandal. And it's quite important to get those things out. So I think that what still puzzles us is also a really important question when it comes to retrospectives. Now, the way that I learned about retrospectives was that I went to a presentation by Linda Rising at a conference in Denmark, which is the conference that the Yao conferences are copied from. That's historically correct. She was talking about retrospectives, and I didn't know what it was. She was mentioning this book by Norm Kurth, Project Retrospectives, the first book about retrospectives. Um, and she gave me a copy of the Project Retrospectives book because I was the only one brave enough in the audience to say I didn't know what she was talking about. And I read this book and I loved it. And if you're interested in retrospectives and you haven't read this book, you should get your hands on it and read it, because this is the original book. This is the book that all other writings are based upon. You can see the shadows from this book in everything that people write about retrospectives. Now, there was also something that came like the same year that I finished my PhD, the Agile Manifesto, or the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. And one of the things also, as Vivek mentioned, is as at regular intervals, the team reflects and blah, 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 becomes more effective. The inspection and adaptation of Agile ways of working is the core of Agile ways of working. To be able to inspect, to have the visibility to see what's actually going on, that comes down to the thing about transparency that Vivek mentioned about data. It's important that we are actually able to inspect what's happening. One thing is being able to see the data, being able to share this at the retrospective, but the adaptation, to have the courage and the technological possibility to actually adapt to what you learn, is quite important as well. So you both have to be able to inspect and adapt. And inspection is what we do in the retrospectives. Because of all this, with the shorter sprints, we couldn't really use the Project Retrospectives book by Norm Kurth because he was describing retrospectives that were 3 days long. So out comes another book, Esther Darby and Diana Larsen, Agile Retrospectives, basically taking what we've learned now from boiling down these longer retrospective activities into shorter things where the activities take 10, 20, 30 minutes instead of half a day. Because you can't have a 3-day retrospective after a 2-week sprint, obviously. So there was a lot of writing about how to make retrospectives well, and I I really worked a lot with Diana Larsen. Not that she knew all of the work I did with her, but we did teach together some classes about retrospectives, and she also wrote the foreword in my book, because my book is not about how to do retrospectives, but about how to not do retrospectives. Because the way that I like to communicate is to talk about my mistakes so that people laugh at it. Because when they laugh at it, it's much easier for them to remember what I said, because it sort of fires new things in their brain. And also talking about your mistakes allows other people to be open about their mistakes. And since retrospectives are about learning, I think it's quite important that we try to look at mistakes as a as a way to learn, or unexpected consequences as a way to learn. So that's why I wrote this book. And one of the first retrospective anti-patterns, and the most important one, is called prime directive ignorance. So that, to me, is the most important anti-pattern. And the prime directive came from Norm Kurth. It was in his original book. Just going to show it to you and then read it aloud. So it says, regardless of what we discover, we must understand and truly believe that everyone did the best job they could, given what was known at the time, their skills and abilities, the resources available, and the situation at hand. And the trouble with this is that a lot of people are thinking, I can't truly believe that people did their best, because I know that he's lazy and she's an idiot. And I know that even myself don't do my best at times. But what Norm Kurth means with this prime directive is that you should try to enter this mindset when you enter retrospective. That comes down to the psychological safety part that was also mentioned before. That if you can try to enter a retrospective thinking to understand everything is to forgive everything, instead of trying to find a scapegoat, you will be much more interested in actually listening to what people will say. You will be less in a fight or flight emotion. You'll have your intellect working for you instead of against you. So it is quite important not to ignore the prime directive for retrospectives, but it is so easy to do it. And that's why I call this pattern the prime directive ignorance, is because people sometimes finds it easier just to ignore the prime directive, because then they don't have to fight with the engineers or the software developers about being naive and hippie, believing that everybody did the best job they could. So what I say to overcome this anti-pattern is that the refactored solution is to bring the prime directive, maybe have it actually on a poster in the room, or maybe in an email, maybe in the agenda where you invite people, remind them of the prime directive when you invite them. If you think that the words of Norm Kurth are too weird, you can just say it in your own words. I sometimes say, remember, we're here to try to optimize the system, not to find faults in individual people. And sometimes you need to remind those that need it. Sometimes it's not enough to say it in the beginning or in the email. Sometimes you have to say, oh, remember the prime directive? We're here to find faults in the system. And I think it's such an important part of building psychological safety, is to actually live this prime directive for retrospectives. And I remember one of the best managers I ever had. I made a huge mistake at some point, really huge, and I noticed it the day before Christmas Eve, and I was so embarrassed and frustrated, and I was sure that it would kill my whole Christmas vacation with my family, and I would get fired. So I had to call him up and tell him what happened, and he took a very, very, very deep breath, and then he said, "That's interesting. We have to find out how to change the process in the future." I was so relieved and a little bit baffled, but it was wonderful. Definitely the best manager I ever had. So if you can live the Prem directive, if you can assume the best in people instead of trying to tell them off, that's wonderful. And that, if you can live that, will mean that the retrospectives are actually really useful and constructive. Another thing that I often see with retrospectives is the anti-pattern called Wheel of Fortune. You remember when you go to a Tivoli and this Wheel of Fortune turns around and says tick, 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 tick. Sometimes you get a prize, but sometimes you don't get a prize, right? Most often you don't get a prize. And to me, the Wheel of Fortune is what happens sometimes at retrospectives, where you maybe you put up these posters that says start, stop, continue, right? And then you say, okay, so all the things in start, we'll start doing that. That's our action points. And then we'll stop doing this. And then we've done the retrospective in 20 minutes, and people brag to me and they say, oh, I know. Your 90 minutes of a retrospective, ridiculous. We're so good, we can do it in 20 minutes. And I'm like, oh no. I've even had people who say, we can do a retrospective in 5 minutes just to impress me. But I'm very unimpressed about that. And the reason why I'm unimpressed about that is that if you do this start, stop, continue, and then you rush to solutions, imagine that it says we should do more pair programming, we should have less meetings, or we should stop ignoring the pull requests. Those are the things that I very often hear in retrospectives. And then maybe you just say, okay, well, if we want more pair programming, we'll just schedule more pair programming 3 days a week. Every morning, we will do pair programming. And then you just implement that in the team. But what if the reason why you did pair programming was not that you forgot to do pair programming? What if the reason that you did not do pair programming was that people are worried to let others see how they work? Um, there's a bad sort of culture, laughing at each other. Maybe people feel bad for how they work themselves. Maybe they don't know how to do it online. Maybe some people are really introvert and lose energy from working with other people. If those were the causes for not having pair programming, and you just enforce more scheduled pair programming, you are making the problem worse instead of better. So if you're pushing through a retrospective, pushing the learnings through like that without having a course analysis, you can make the problems worse. It's the same with less meetings. I hear that all the time. But if you actually dive into that, it turns out it's not the quantity of the meetings, it's the quality of the meetings that's the problem. I mean, it can be the quantity, but it's most often just that meetings are not well prepared, not well executed, and not well followed up on. And then, as we can say about the retrospectives, if they're not done well, they are a waste of time. Stop ignoring the pull requests. People can have these fancy AI bots to remind people to do it and push people to do it. But again, if you're not really solving the cause of the problem, but just the symptom of the problem, it's not working. It's a bit like having skin cancer and just putting a band-aid on it. You can't see it, but it's definitely still there. It'll just pop up somewhere else, right? And that's one of the problems, is that if you look at the way that at least Dana Larsen and Esther Darby describes the process of a retrospective, it's first setting the stage where you're getting ready, you're making everybody say something so that it's easier for them to say something. Maybe you have a theme, maybe you are following up on the action points from last time. Then you gather data, and those data can be either the subjective data or they can be real, like real data from feedback from customers, how much time are you spending on meetings, blah, 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 blah. Then you generate insights. You try to understand why this happened. You make some sort of course analysis, 5 whys or Ishikawa diagram, and then you decide what to do. You figure out, how do we make these decisions in our team? Is it democratic? Is it consensus? Is it consent? Or is it dictatorship? Sometimes that's the only thing to do. And then you close the retrospective and you make sure that every action point or experiment has a name on it, a deadline, and the first short thing to start doing it. Otherwise, it won't be done. But the trouble is that one of the things that are really difficult is generating insight. It's difficult and it's a bit fluffy, and people often skip it in order to save time or because it's too difficult. And then you do this, that you jump to conclusions. You think that the things that you see are the problems, even though they might sometimes just be the symptoms of the problems. So if we look at all meetings, then we can say that they actually also consist of 5 different parts of a meeting, like the retrospective. And the interesting thing about every team is that they struggle with different parts of this. Some teams struggle with, what is actually the topic of this? What's the agenda? What do we expect to get out of this meeting or this retrospective? The divergence is where we introduce a lot of different data. We say, this is what we're going to spend our discussion on. This is what we're going to base our discussions on. These are the constraints of what we want to talk about. We're going to talk about this, but not this. And then we have the groan zone, where people are discussing, debating, trying to make course analysis, open discussions. And then we have the convergence, where we try to cut off the discussions, we try to come to agreement, and in the end, then we make a decision and we say, this is what we go out with. And the interesting thing is that different types of teams struggle with different parts of any meeting, and thus also retrospectives. Some teams just send out meeting invitations without thinking about why or whatnot and who to invite. Some teams struggle with divergence. They don't want to share their data because they're embarrassed or worried to get told off. A lot of teams, especially in the engineering part of people, struggle with the groan zone because they are so hardwired to solve problems that every time they see a problem, they come up with a solution, which is also really irritating for their spouses. But it's also a problem in meetings that they don't spend time actually thinking about other more weird solutions or causes. They just solve it. So sometimes, as a retrospective facilitator, it can be almost physically straining to keep this groan zone open before we allow them to enter the decision phase. But it's interesting. And I think it's important to look at these different parts of any meeting also when it comes to retrospectives, and think about, for your team, what are the difficult parts of this? So this is what I call the wheel of fortune, because some retrospectives are just a wheel of fortune. Sometimes you're lucky that it is the problem you're solving, but sometimes it's just a symptom. Do it yourself is another anti-pattern that I see a lot. And when I say do it yourself anti-pattern, I mean that if you're working with Scrum, for instance, a lot of organizations still use Scrum. It is almost the Scrum Master who always facilitates the retrospectives. And I think that's problematic for a lot of reasons. One, when you are facilitating a retrospective, this is a full-time job. You have to think about these 5 phases. How much time can you spend? If I spend a little bit more time in generating insight, can I do something with my decision phase so that I spend a little less time there? Should we allow this discussion to move on? Should I ask them to have this discussion somewhere else? Looking at the body language, who's not said something for a long time, whose voice is changing right now, so that maybe we shouldn't have a plenary discussion, but we should go into breakout rooms or pair discussions. It's really important as a facilitator that you are hyper aware of everything and everybody. And if you are that, you can't be part of the discussion. So you will miss out on having a retrospective yourself if you are facilitating. On the other hand, if you go into one of the discussions that are there because you are part of the team, and this is also interesting for your work, you will forget to notice what's going on with everybody else. You will forget the time. I've tried that myself facilitating for my team, and it's really, really difficult. And that's why I think do it yourself is problematic also, because sometimes it can become stale. So you'll be doing the same over and over again, and that's why it can be good to have somebody else do it. But also sometimes you get complaints about, oh, it's always the same, it's a bad facilitator. If you let other people facilitate, then they can see it's actually not as easy as it looks, and that might make them appreciate it a little bit more. So you can either do a rotation within your team, have the others facilitate the retrospective, or you can do what we did once. We had this shared diagram where we had all the different teams and the people in the organization who were interested in facilitating retrospectives. And then we could sign up for facilitating retrospectives for the different teams. And then some teams wanted the same facilitator all the time. Some teams wanted something new all the time. Again, teams are different. The culture is different. So you can figure out what you need. Or you can have somebody like me from the outside to facilitate your retrospectives. I have some organizations where I facilitate a retrospective every month or every 3 months, so that they get somebody from the outside who is completely not part of it, who is not interested in getting a promotion within the company, who's not interested in telling off to other people. It can be pretty nice to have somebody who's really neutral to do that. So that was do it yourself. I just have 2 more patterns. One, oh, Stuart says we tend to rotate within the team. That's really good, Stuart. I think that's brilliant. And if you have anything else to add to that, please do that in the chat, because I think that's something that a lot of people have thought about doing but finds it difficult to do. So the disregard for preparation is actually it's an anti-pattern that I found before COVID, because I started doing online retrospectives. And I found out that doing an online retrospective is actually not the same as doing an in real life retrospective, because in an in real life retrospective, I have the post-it notes, I have the posters, I have the whiteboard, I can change things easily. And when I get up and go to the retrospective, people notice that I do that. But a lot of things happened in the online retrospectives that weren't really that good, and people would show up late to the retrospectives, and it would be difficult for me to actually make a live retrospective where I changed the agenda while I was doing it. So I came up with some suggestions for doing online retrospectives that's also on my website, together with some templates for that you can use for online retrospectives. You can just copy them from my website and use them if you want to. But one of the things that I learned was send an email the day before the retrospective with a link to the board that you'll be using, and ask them to please make sure they can access it today and not 5 minutes into the meeting tomorrow. Then send an email 15 minutes before and tell them, oh, there's a retrospective in 15 minutes. Now there's time for a bio break or getting some coffee. Because when people have online meetings all day, And then let's imagine completely hypothetically that they show up for a retrospective and 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 Lars is not there. Then people are saying, "Oh, if Lars not there, I can go get a cup of coffee while until he comes back." So now Lisa leaves to get a cup of coffee. Lars comes back, but now Peter arrives and he says, "Oh, Lisa's not here. I just have to rush to the toilet for a bio break. Sorry." And then what happens is that it starts maybe 7 minutes in the time, and 7 minutes is a long time in a retrospective. And when do you start your setting the stage? Do you start talking to people about the action points before everybody's there? Do you start asking everybody like what their energy level is or whatever you have as an introductory check-in question? When do you do that? Everything is delayed 7 minutes. So send an email 15 minutes before and urge them to have the coffee now and get the bio break now. Because the trouble is when you get up to get the coffee, if you're a little bit older, that's when you notice you need a bio break, right? And then it all takes longer. And insist on video for all. And I know this is controversial. I know that. And I have, please don't tell me about the book that's been written by a man who says that it's really hard psychologically to be in online meetings with video on day. I know about the book. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying here is when you are facilitating a retrospective, you are dependent on people's body language. And if it's an online meeting, all you have is this, right? It's really important for you to be able to do your job well, to know whether people are angry, whether they want to say something, but they can't get through, whether they've fallen asleep or whether they're just working on whatever they want to do, right? It's really important for you. I'm not insisting on video for all just to be an ass. But it's so important for you as a facilitator to be able to do your job well, to get those clues from people, the few ones that you can get. I also sometimes say to people, please don't mute yourself unless you have a barking dog nearby or you had too much cabbage yesterday. Just please don't mute yourself because I want to hear you slurping coffee. I want to hear you laughing at things, right? It means that it gives you data points for whether we're going in the right direction or not. But if people don't want to be on video, then you can talk to them after the meeting. Don't call them out. Ask them whether it's problematic for them. Of course, if it's problematic for them, they shouldn't do it. But please tell them that meetings are different. We call everything meetings now. But a retrospective is a place where everybody are equal and thus everybody should be seen. If you have another meeting, which is like a status meeting where you take turns in talking about data or presenting it, maybe that's okay. You can't see people's reaction to that. But the retrospective, could we just have the retrospective with video, please? Also today, when I'm giving this talk to you, it's so wonderful for me to see your reactions. It means a lot for me, right? It really does give me energy. Make sure everyone is equal. And that's those hybrid retrospectives that come out. I don't like them. So people will tell me, but we've got this wonderful telecommunication room where everybody can talk much better. Yes, but what about the 4 people who are remote? They don't have the same. Like they're challenged when it comes to communication. So just, I mean, you can do that for all the other meetings, but for retrospectives, please make sure everybody is equal. Don't make the hybrid retrospectives. Give everybody the same challenges, right? Everybody should, if somebody's sitting on the computer somewhere else, everybody should be sitting on their own computer with the board. That, like, it could be that you make, if it's just one person who's away, you can make an avatar, you can have somebody have the direct communication with that person, but otherwise, please don't make hybrid retrospectives. And prepare a strict agenda and an alternative, because as I said before, if it's a real life retrospective, it's much easier to change. But if you prepared your boards, you have to actually prepare your board for that as well. I have these little books, and every time I am to facilitate a retrospective, I write down the names of the people who'll be there so that I can tick them off, so that I can count how many have actually said something. I write down my agenda. What do I want to do in the 5 different things, different aspects, and then I have a backup. Maybe I need something else here. Maybe I need something else here. And then don't record it. Just don't record a retrospective. It's terrible. I have a sunrise in my face right now. I don't know if you can see it, so that's why I'm sort of huddling under the screen so that I don't get blinded by it. Are there any questions? Now I haven't really given you the chance to say anything, and I can't see the chat right now, only when things pop up. So
You can keep going. We'll have time for more Q&A at the end as well, I know. So yeah, unless you want to
good.
stop for questions, yeah.
No, 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 no. No, it's fine. Yeah, the sunrise is amazing right outside my window, but I will continue to focus on you, of course.
I know. Is it the
So that
time of
was
year where you have like a 12-hour or like a 20-hour day, or
we're going out of that now,
oh,
unfortunately.
going
Yeah,
into the
so it
night?
we're going into the night now. We are actually just at the jævndøgn, the equal day, as we say in Denmark. That was the middle of September. That means that the day and the night are equally long. And every day now we lose 5 minutes of the day. Yeah. So I go to a choir every Tuesday, and it's very interesting that in the summertime, it's light when I arrive, it's light when I go home. We're now at the time where it's light when I arrive, it gets dark before the break, and in a month, it'll be dark when I arrive, and in 2 months, it'll be dark when I wake up, and it'll be dark when I come home from work. But the summers are wonderful. Yeah. So the last thing I want to talk about, the last anti-pattern is in the soup. And what you see here is the octopus trying to lift a weight that's too heavy for it. And the octopus is an amazing creature. 60% of the brain of an octopus is in its tentacles, and the tentacles are actually living their own life. A tentacle can be so irritating that the other tentacles rips it off the octopus because it's doing things that are naughty and not helpful for the rest of the octopus. And then it grows a new tentacle. And if a tentacle indeed is lost of an octopus, it can grow another tentacle. But sometimes, if the tentacle is cut off too high up, it grows 8 tentacles. And I guess that's why human beings can't do that. Because if we grew a whole body when we lost an arm, people would not like to have children with us. So the people who could actually do that Darwinistically had been taken away from our yeah, well, let's not. So, but the reason why I have one of the reasons why I have octopuses in my book about retrospectives is because I see an octopus as a brilliant picture of a team. Every team member has their own intelligence and personality, but together, if they're working together, they become more than the sum of everybody. So that's why I think that an octopus is a very good picture of a team. And the same goes for the people in the team. They can come out of the team if they're not working in the right direction. Then you can get somebody else in the team, and then sometimes you get a team that's exploding with a lot more team members if you rip it off in the wrong way, and then you get too many teams. But let's not go too much down there. Now, in the soup is an anti-pattern that talks about the teams wanting to discuss things at retrospectives that they cannot change, things that are in the soup. This is an activity that it's not necessarily just a retrospective activity. It's not necessarily something new, but I learned it from Diana Larsen, and she called it the soup. So she said that you draw 2 circles on the board. The innermost circle are for the things that the team can do something about, and the outermost circle is for the things that the team can influence or the things that team can say something about. And outside the circles is what we call the soup. Because sometimes you have a retrospective with a team where they are complaining about things that they cannot change, and they start discussing things that is not possible for them to change, and then they return to office, for instance. They can discuss that as long as they want, but they cannot change it, and then it just becomes a complaining session that takes away energy and is not helping. So sometimes when I've gathered the data, when I've have all the post-it notes, then I ask people to move the post-it notes to this soup diagram and say, how many of these things can we do something about? How many of these things can we influence? And how many of these things are actually in the soup? Because then we can have a much more uh, intelligent discussion about what we should actually spend our time on in the retrospective. Sometimes I do this just to hold up a mirror towards the team, saying, what do you see here? And then sometimes they see all the things that are red are in the soup. And then I say, what does this mean? Well, it means we're complaining about a lot of things that we can't do anything about. And that can be, it can be true, but it can also be the symptoms of a team who does not want to take responsibility. It's all the manager's fault. It's all Scrum's fault. It's all COVID's fault. It's all, I don't know, the president's fault or something like that. And the interesting thing here, yeah, it's all Jira's fault. um, the interesting thing here is what you do then when you have divided these things into these categories. So one thing you can do is that you can say, this time we only focus on the things in the do. Or maybe you say that, okay, so there are some things in the influence, but if we had these people from the other team, or if we had this manager in the next retrospective, then maybe we could talk about this. Maybe we could do something about that. So you can see that the more people we have in a retrospective, the bigger the circle of do, but also then, unfortunately, the less psychological safety is there. So it's a trade-off always. And about the things in the soup, these are the things that you have to learn to live with. So in Denmark, we say, please let me understand what problems I need coffee to solve to stay awake, what problems I need red wine to forget, and how to figure out whether it's a coffee or a red wine problem. And I think those discussions are interesting in themselves, but it could also be that you are discussing these things and it turns out that actually maybe you can't solve the things, but maybe you can influence the things in the soup. Maybe you can actually solve parts of the things that are only in influence. And I think that this another important thing is the goblin theory that I have, that I believe Chris has already heard about, and that is, what do we do about the things in the soup that we cannot change? And that's where I use my goblin always. So in my marriage, which has been for 26 years now, the first 10 years we had this problem that when my beloved husband had taken a shower, the wet towel that he's standing on when he comes out was still on the floor of the bathroom. And when I came into the bathroom, my socks would get wet from this wet towel and it wouldn't dry because it was lying in a little pile on the floor. And the first 10 years, I tried everything, like crying, shouting, manipulating, nothing worked. And then after 10 years, we introduced a goblin. And the goblin is a little creature in Denmark that teases you. And we decided that we have a little goblin that has moved in. So even though my husband diligently hangs up the towel to dry every morning after his shower, the goblin comes out afterwards and crumbles it up and throws it on the floor. So every morning when I come into the bathroom, I'm complaining about the goblin and he's saying, oh, that goblin again. And then he goes out and he hangs up the towel that the goblin just threw down. And see, the point about a goblin, it doesn't solve the problem, but it makes it laughable. And I'm just going to take the curtain down while I'm talking. And I think it's quite important that instead of just complaining about the things that you cannot change, you should maybe try to find a way to laugh about it instead. So for instance, if you're irritated about Jira or something like that, what you should do instead is that whenever you are irritating, you put a little sticker on a board or something like that. And when you have 10 stickers, you buy ice cream for the whole team or something like that. It's like when you say, well, if you get lemons, make lemonade. Try to be actually concrete about this goblin and introduce the goblin. If there's something you can't change, try to do that. So I call this in the soup because sometimes things are in the soup. And these are my templates, my own and some other templates. And you will get the slides so you can follow the links to that. And I just want to end with what worked well, what can we do better, what still puzzles us around retrospectives. And I'm looking at the chat to see if there are any questions here.
Yeah, there are a
I'm
few
sure.
questions, I know. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen now, and then we can do the Q&A. But thank you so much.
Yep.
That was, yeah, an extremely engaging talk, and I learned a lot about things I was not expecting to learn about as well, like goblins and octopuses. Cool. Ginny, I just sent a share request for me. Oh yeah, cool. So yeah, thank you
So
so
I'll
much.
stop sharing.
And I'll
Yeah.
kick off with one of the first questions that came through, and then we've got Stu's next. But yeah, curious to know on the research as well and what your thoughts were in terms of the role of subjective, and this kind of ties into what Stuart's talking about,
Yeah.
the role of
Sorry, I
subjective opinions
completely
versus
completely forgot to talk about that.
no, it's
Yes.
okay, versus data. And should data even be a part of retro?
Yes, I was thinking that I wanted to talk about that, but then I just went into Aino mode. I'm sorry. I think that the gathering data is an interesting point because a lot of people are saying it's ridiculous you call it gather data when you're just writing subjective feelings on post-it notes. And I've always thought that both things are actually invited to be part of the retrospectives. You can definitely have retrospectives where it's just subjective feelings and post-it notes, but then you run into situations like people are complaining about we're spending too much time on meetings, or we're spending too much time on stupid admin Jira things, or the users hate us, or everybody else thinks we're stupid in the IT department or whatever. And that's when I say that it's important to actually bring real data. So when you're complaining about how much time you're spending on Jira admin or meetings, how much time are you actually spending? Like, please bring me the real data, because otherwise people are complaining based on a feeling, and your biggest problem is always your biggest problem. So problems have a tendency to like become bigger in your brain, and especially if you talk to other people about it and you complain about it, then it feels like it's bigger than it is. So for that reason, to make people have like a reality check, I ask people to bring real data. I also sometimes ask people to bring real data because it's not easy for them to talk about feelings or subjective things, that they are maybe the kind of people who really likes data. And then I ask them to bring your favorite data from the work you've done the last 2 weeks. So instead of saying you should bring data about this, I said bring your favorite data or bring your favorite number or something like that. And it's interesting to see then what are they choosing to bring. And you can build a whole retrospective about the 7 numbers that people bring. These are the lines of code we have in our system, or these are the different files we have, or this is how many times I actually made a code review or something like that. And then you can tell something from from the data that people are choosing to bring. It's also interesting why they chose that data, and whether they chose it because is there a trend upwards? Is there a trend downwards? Is this a pattern? Is this surprising? Why do you choose this data? What's it about? So I think that no, but also no matter how much I ask them to talk about data, how much we talk about numbers, we almost always end up talking about people and communication.
Mm.
Yeah, sorry. I'm gonna shut up a bit because
No,
maybe
no,
we
no,
have time
that
for
was
another question.
fantastic. And then maybe we just have 1 minute to go. So, Stuart, we'll go for your question, which was kind of similar, but maybe you want to kind of explain it a little bit more. But essentially, is a limited amount of retro complaining worth it for the venting that you get?
Yeah, that was kind
Can you
of
say that
relative.
again? Yeah.
It was
Ah,
relative
sorry.
to the idea of the soup, which I quite like because yeah, we all have that in businesses, right? We work in teams which are part of a business, so there's stuff we don't have any control over. The kind of time box complaining you mentioned, Lauren, makes sense to me too, because it's not productive. You know, it is just people venting, but it's also potentially an important gauge of, you know, if the whole team is complaining about something, then it probably should raise an eyebrow, right? I mean, if you can't, yeah, the classic problem is if you can't change something in your space, and it is enough of an irritant to you, you leave, right? Which I don't want to happen with my engineers, but yeah, interesting. I like the idea. Just acknowledging the fact that there's irritants, but we can't change them, and we'll move on with our lives. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think time boxed complaining is a good idea as well. I have these. I can't translate that to English, but sometimes I meet with my mother, and we've dedicated space just to complain about other people. And we know that nobody will hear what we say, and we're not going to change this. We just have an hour. I just need really to complain about these people. But then when I meet these people again, I can smile and I can be really polite as I can be as a Danish person. And I think it's important to be really, as you say, to stress the fact this is a problem. I acknowledge there is a problem, but also acknowledge we can't do anything about it. So what are our options, right? If it's too bad, you can leave, but we can also maybe find a way to laugh about it. Or we can ask somebody in another organization, do you have this as well? Or is everybody struggling with it? Well, maybe sometimes, sometimes we can change the world with this. So we shouldn't just give up. And that's why I think it's important to have this diagram. We can't just abandon these things, but maybe just limit the time, as you say.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know that is going to be our last question. We ran just the time, but we are also doing some more original research at Multitudes. So we're doing an industry survey. We're looking at the impact of AI on developer productivity. Would love for everyone
Ah,
here to kind of fill out a survey for us or share it with other tech leaders as well. And we'll be also donating a bunch of money to charities as well as part of it. And the three charities we're looking to support are the Data Workers Inquiry, which is a charity supported by Timnit Kibru, who's an AI ethicists organization. Another one is the Algorithmic Justice League. They do a lot of amazing advocacy and research and new techniques to reduce bias in AI. And then also Tech for Palestine as well. So those are the three different organizations we'll be looking to donate money to. So please, yeah, share it with the community and also fill it out. We'd really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be writing another paper soon. And we're partnering with some amazing researchers globally on this piece of work too.